Hello, everybody, and welcome to this City Nation Place webinar. My name is Claire Dewhurst. I'm the Director of City Nation Place, and we're delighted to be able to host this session with our partners at Reputation Lab, and we're looking forward to the discussion. So I'm very happy to introduce you to both of our speakers today. First of all, Fernando Prado Abuín, who is the Managing Partner at Reputation Lab, and he'll be sharing insights with us today on the key drivers of perception from the 2024 RepCore Nations study. Hi, Fernando.
Hello.
Good to have you with us. And I'm also happy to introduce Christian Biller, who is a brand strategist with the Swedish Institute, and who'll be joining me in discussion after Fernando's presentation. Hello, Christian.
Hi, Claire.
Lovely to have you with us. And of course, everybody, as you're joining, we will very much welcome your own questions. I think you should have a question button that you can see, and I will field your questions to Fernando towards the end of the session. So please do put those questions there as they come to you. But I am very delighted now to hand over to Fernando to share the presentation with you.
Thank you very much, Claire. Good morning to those who follow us from the Americas. Good afternoon to those who follow us from Europe or Africa. And good evening to those who, despite the time difference, follow us from Asia Pacific. Well, my name is Fernando Prado. I am a partner at Reputation Lab, which is an advisory firm specialized in the measurement and management of corporate reputation. We have presence in Europe and Latin America. And thank you very much for your time today. I also would like to thank Claire and City Nation Place for organizing this webinar, and Christian Biller and the Swedish Institutes for agreeing to participate. It is a pleasure to be able to share with you the results of our latest country reputation research. Well, as the agenda for today, I would like to begin by explaining why a country reputation is important and its impact on the economy and international relations. We will then explain how it is measured using our RepCore Nations methodology to help us understand how each country is perceived. Well, at this point, we will present some of the results of the study. I would like to stress that I wouldn't like to have, let's say, beauty contest today. We are going to show results and a ranking of the reputation of different countries and the reason why those countries have that reputation. But the idea and the way I would like to approach this webinar is basically to understand how we can manage reputation in a similar way to the one that we use for managing the reputation of companies and other organizations. No? Well, to be able to manage, we also need to understand what the expectations of the international audiences are, which is another important output of the research. Which variables are most important and therefore need more attention. No? The next step will be to diagnose each country and understand its strengths and weaknesses in those elements most related to the expectations of international audiences in order to prioritize. Finally, well, it is necessary to understand relationships between reality and perception in order to identify communication opportunities and reputational risks. I will end the session, the next 25 minutes or so, with some takeaways, some conclusions. Well, to start, I would like to define what we are going to measure. What is reputation? Well, reputation is the set of feelings generated from perceptions, judgments, and evaluations of stakeholders about a company, an organization, and of course, about a country. It is an emotional concept. I want to stress this point. A good reputation encompasses feelings of admiration, trust, and respect. This is what we measure: admiration, trust, and respect. But we can explain that admiration, trust, and respect with a lot of different rational variables that can be managed. Reputation conditions the attitudes and behaviors of the stakeholders towards a company, an organization, and of course, a country. So as I said before, we will use the same approaches to measure and manage a country's reputation as we usually do for corporations. And we say that we live in the reputation economy. A nation's reputation is built through 4 channels. First, we have the direct experience, whether we have visited the country, consumed products, met people coming from there, etc. This is very important when we have that experience. Secondly, there is the country's own communication, its promotion as a tourist destination, the communication of its companies and institutions, its participation in international organizations, etc. Thirdly, there is what others say about the country, mainly the news, but also comments and word of mouth from the experiences of others. And finally, there are the stereotypes, generally accepted in the collective imaginary, and some come from a past reality and in many cases do not do justice. But in the absence of further information of the other 3 ways, they tend to fill in the gaps. Some countries see the reputation very much marked by these stereotypes. Perception is built through these 4 channels. Once emotionally internalized, it becomes those feelings of admiration, respect, and trust, or the opposite if it is a bad reputation. What is most interesting is that we can empirically demonstrate that these feelings have a direct impact on attributes and behaviors, such as the intention to visit the country, to buy its products, to invest, to hire professionals from there, etc. It also has an effect on the consideration that countries have in the international institutions, what we call the soft power. These attitudes and behaviors translate into economic variables such as tourist arrivals, foreign direct investment, or exports. And the good thing of this kind of analysis is that we can also quantify these relationships and estimate to what extent an increase in the reputation indicator is reflected in economic variables, such as tourist arrivals, exports, or foreign direct investment. I'm going to give you an example. This year, we have estimated the impact on tourist arrivals. Taking 3 years of tourist arrivals data in dollar value from the World Tourism Organization and comparing it to our RepCore Nations data series, we were able to determine that a 1-point increase in a country's reputation score translates on average into a 4.9% increase in the revenue from tourist arrivals. That means a lot of $1 million. So this is the reason why, well, a country reputation, it's very important and should be managed. Last year, we made this same analysis with foreign direct investment. It was not as high, that percentage, but it was 1.7%. So at the end, every time we are able to increase a country's reputation, the level of admiration, trust, and respect, we are obtaining economic results, economic and also qualitative results with this increasing in soft power. So if reputation is so important, how can we manage it? Well, first of all, I have to say that you can't manage what you can't measure. No? If a country's reputation is so important, it needs to be managed. And since what cannot be measured cannot be managed, we need metrics that allow us to understand strengths and weaknesses of our country, establish KPIs, key performance indicators, to make comparisons with other benchmark countries, develop action plans, and measure evolutions over time in order to be able to do management. I like to use this chart from Professor Charles von Brum to explain what reputation management is about. As for companies, it is necessary to compare reality and perception in each of the variables, the rational variables, that build a country's reputation. Reputation is perceptions, and it is perceptions that drive behavior, not reality. But understanding the gaps allow us to identify communication opportunities when we have a better reality than perception, and reputational risks when we have a better perception than reality, that can, if a crisis happens or if the stakeholders get to know about that bad reality, we can lose that good reputation or good perception. So we have to take and identify those communication opportunities and reputational risks in order to develop action plans. So let's go to the first step. We said that we cannot manage what we cannot measure. To measure and manage reputation of countries, we have adapted our RepCore model to use specific attributes that can explain the reputation of a country. We have our RepCore model is normally used for companies, and we have developed the RepCore Nations in order to explain the reputation of a country. This methodology measures the level of admiration, respect, and trust. That is what we call reputation score. And the reputation score is basically an emotional value. And this is what tells us if a country has such or such level of reputation. The important thing is that we are able to explain that reputation, that admiration, trust, and respect with a set of 22 rational attributes grouped into 5 dimensions: institutional quality, quality of life, level of development, human factor, and ethics and responsibility. We have a third group of variables, which we call supportive behaviors. Supportive behaviors connect reputation with economic value added. Supportive behaviors are: I would visit the country, I would invest in the country, I would live in the country, study in the country, organize an event, or buy products that are coming from the country. So we have in our methodology those 3 levels of variables: rep score, emotional, admiration, trust, and respect; rational dimensions, 22 individual attributes that are talking about politics, economy, culture, and all kinds of different elements. If you have a look, you have things like analyzing if the country is safe, it has an appealing natural environment or attractive lifestyle, that is quality of life, or if it has well-known brands and company, or a huge cultural legacy, it's technologically advanced, that will be part of the level of development, or if it has a good social welfare, an effective government and institutions, is committed to the international community, or a friendly business environment, that would be institutional quality. And nowadays, very relevant, if it is an ethical and transparent country without corruption, if it protects the environment, fights climate change, respects human rights, it makes an efficient use of the public resources. All those different rational elements explain that admiration, trust, and respect, and finally have an impact on the supportive behaviors. So let's explain what we have done this year, 2024, in terms of our study. For the 2024 edition of the study, we interviewed 37,000 people, 37,613 people in 28 countries, those colored in this map. For the ranking that we will present today, we have used the 60 countries with the highest GDP measured by the general population of the most industrialized countries, the countries of the G7. So let's move quickly to that ranking and start giving some data of what we have done today. In our studies, we use a normative scale whose average is 50 points. Above 65 points, our reputation is excellent. Between 55 and 65, we say it's a strong reputation. Between 45 and 55, it's moderate. Between 35 and 45, weak. And below 35 points, it's a poor reputation. And we use colors for that. In 2024, there is no country with an excellent reputation, but there are 4 that are very close. Switzerland, Norway, Sweden, and Canada are very close to the level of excellent. And between the first and the fourth, between Switzerland and Canada, well, there is only 1 point difference, which is a statistically significant difference because the sample is quite large, but it's still a small difference. So we can say that those 4 countries really are the countries with the best reputation. Russia, Iraq, and Iran continue to close the table. They were the three countries in the bottom last year. And again, this year, since the invasion of Ukraine, Russia's international reputation has been in the last position. The country with the best reputation in North America is Canada, in Latin America, Peru, in Europe, Switzerland, in Africa, Morocco, in Asia, Japan, and in Oceania is New Zealand. The countries with a strong reputation are well rated in all the dimensions of reputation. Well, if you have a look at this ranking, you see that there are very large economies that do not rank on the top. Being well-known, big or powerful is not a guarantee of a good reputation. You know, if we compare the degree of familiarity, understood awareness, we ask how much do you know a specific country. Countries, well, if we compare that familiarity with the reputation score among those who know each country, we can see that there are all kinds of circumstances. For example, if you have a look to this chart, you see China, for example, is a country that is well known but has a poor reputation. Or the USA is very well known, has a large familiarity, a huge familiarity, but an average reputation. But for example, Singapore has a strong reputation even if the familiarity is low. So you can see that you need to always understand those two different concepts, familiarity and reputation. A country can be very well known with bad reputation or not very well known and with good reputation. You have other countries like Italy, France, Spain, the UK that have a good reputation and also a lot of awareness. Well, let's go to the evolution of the different countries from last year to this year. In the year 2024, the country that falls the most, or I would say the one that is with the news that we have would be the headline, is Israel, due to the military retaliation in Gaza after the terrorist attacks on October 7. And in fact, it loses 9 positions in the ranking, going from position 45th in 2023 to 54th in 2024. We wanted to understand the international perception of this issue and ask in the 28 countries where where we have conducted the fieldwork, to what extent public opinion agreed with the complaint filed by South Africa against Israel before the International Criminal Court for genocide against the Palestinian population. So we ask exactly that way the question in order to know if they agreed or disagreed. And what we got is that the majority of respondents in the 28 countries strongly agreed with South Africa's indictment with different proportions. There were countries that majority was larger than others, but in all the 28 countries, there was a majority of the people that agreed with South Africa's claim. The only exception was Israel's own population, where more than 80% strongly disagreed. So, well, that would be one part of the news. The second largest drop is that of Ukraine, which have, well, Ukraine had increased a lot in reputation after following the Russian invasion. But after 2 years of war, the emotional appeal has begun to go a little bit down and has lost also 9 positions this year. It is basically because of this loss of part of the emotional appeal it had gained. Among the most notable increases, we have Qatar. Qatar was the country that had fallen the most in 2023, from 2022 to 2023, after its controversial World Cup and all the allegations of disrespect for human rights and with migrant workers. It has recovered in 2024, gaining 6 positions, probably due to its response to these reported issues and also to its mediation in the Gaza conflict. Other countries that have seen their indicator increase in the last year were Ethiopia, China, and Brazil. Ethiopia and Brazil gain quite a lot of positions. China is in the same position, but with a score that has gone up. So this is a bit about the scores, but I would like to talk a bit about the importance of reputation in terms of how it influences the attitudes and behavior of the different audiences. If we compare this emotional indicator with the different supportive behaviors, like I would buy products from the country, I would visit the country, live in the country, study in the country, organize or attend to an event in the country, work in the country, or invest, we see that we have very high correlations. This means that when reputation increases, also the supportive behaviors. Let me give you an example. If we get the intention to visit, and we compare reputation and intention to visit, we can say that a good reputation translates into high intention to visit a country. You see that you have a straight line. You see the perfect correlation. The countries that are better perceived, people want to visit those countries. We have one exception in this line, which is Ukraine. Ukraine has a much better reputation than the level of intention to visit. It's normal. You do not want to go to a country in a war. So that's a logical exception to that straight line in which high reputation means a lot of intention to visit. Well, next step, we said that we wanted to manage reputation. So the first thing is to understand as a country, what is my reputation? What are my strengths and weaknesses? The second step would be, and what is more important for the audience? What are the expectations? What do people think or need about the country? Well, when we go to our 5-dimension model, we can see that the dimension that best explains a country's reputation is the dimension of ethics and responsibility. It aligns with the expectations of the public and has the highest weight and followed by institutional quality and level of development. So you can see that ethics and responsibility nowadays, the ESG criteria are not only important for companies, but very much for countries. If we analyze the last year, more or less, the weights are similar to what we had in 2023. There is an increase in the weight, in the importance of the level of development, in 1%, and slight decrease in human factor. But basically, we have similar weights. Let's go to the individual attribute relevance. What are the attributes that have the highest weight? Well, this is it's similar. We said that ethics and responsibility was the dimension that explains better the expectations of the general population in the G7. Well, again, with the attributes, protection of the environment is number one, the one with the highest weight, followed by, it's a country that fights climate change, efficient management of public resources without, we have too much taxes, effective government and institutions would be number 4, then respect for human rights, appealing natural environment, and then we have all the rest, friendly people, ethical and transparent, no corruption. So we have done something. We have grouped all the attributes that have, let's say, something to do with ESG criteria, environmental, social, and governance. No, and if we take those attributes, we explain 44% of reputation. That means that nowadays, those ESG criteria, as I was mentioning before, are not only relevant for companies, but very much for countries. Let's put together this ESG index, which would be the average of those 9 attributes. And you see all the dots there. All those dots are the 60 countries that we have analyzed in the study. You have this sustainability in the vertical axis, which means if they are perceived well in those 9 attributes, and you have in the horizontal axis reputation, admiration, trust, and respect. As you can see, it's again a straight line. The countries that are perceived as being more sustainable are the countries that have the best reputation. If we compare both rankings, we can say that Norway, Switzerland, and Sweden are also leading the perceived ESG criteria. So Norway is number 1, Switzerland number 2, and Sweden number 3 as the countries perceived as more sustainable. It's important to say that it's a very similar ranking, but you see that there are less countries in green and more countries in orange, which means basically that the expectations of the general public are hard on the countries in terms of they think they are not as good in being sustainable. So that's why they are scoring a little bit lower. This has also to do something with emotional versus rational. Let me give you an example that not everything is exactly the same. If we take Italy and Germany, Italy has a better emotional perception, has a better overall reputation, is in position number 14, while Germany is in position number 21. But when we go to the ESG analysis, to the ESG indicator, Germany ranks number 14 and Italy number 20. So Italy has a strong emotional reputation, but Germany is perceived as more ethical and sustainable. This takes me to my next slide. As I mentioned before, reputation is an emotional concept, and emotions drive behavior. But we can also calculate a rational reputation is indexed by applying the weights to the scores of the individual rational attributes. If we compare those rational indexes of every country with the overall reputation, we can calculate what we call emotional halo. That would be the difference. A positive halo means that the emotional reputation is higher than the rational, and a negative halo would mean that the rational is higher than the emotional. It's easy to see that Ukraine is the country with the highest positive emotional halo. Why? Because the reality of Ukraine, Ukraine has the highest emotional halo because it has concentrated a lot of positive feelings after the Russian invasion. But those positive feelings are not necessarily corresponded with a strong reality in the 5 reputation dimensions. Other countries with a very positive emotional halo are Thailand, Greece, Peru, the Philippines, Egypt, Vietnam, Mexico, Italy, and Indonesia. We see Italy that was scoring higher than Germany before, while, for example, Germany has a negative emotional halo. The country with the highest negative emotional halo is Russia, followed by China, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Germany, Qatar, South Korea, USA, Iran, and the United Arab Emirates. You see that it's relevant to analyze the emotional halo because as supportive behaviors have more to do with the emotional reputation than the rational, a negative halo is not something positive. Having a rational reputation is very good because you can manage that and is more sustainable. But in the short run, it is the emotions that move behavior. Well, there are not relevant difference on expectations by age groups. If we see the ranking of the attributes in terms of their weight, their importance, we see that they are very similar. There is a slight difference in fights against climate change, which, the 18 to 30 group, the Greta Thunberg's generation, for them is the number one priority, the attribute that is more important, and with the people age 45 and plus is number 5. But that would be the most relevant difference. If you see what are the first, 2, 3, 4, 5 attributes by importance, we are always talking about the same. So there are not relevant difference by age group. But However, expectations are not universal. And when we go and we compare with different geographies and we compare G7, China, and Russia, we see that the differences are very relevant. While protection of the environment is the #1 priority in the G7 population, in China is the quality of products and services, and in Russia is safety. #2, for example, fight against climate change in G7 is protection of the environment in China and respected leaders in Russia. And #3, efficient management of public resources in the G7, but friendly business environment both in China and Russia. We see that we need to adapt and to understand what are the priorities, what are the expectations that changes in the different geographies. Well, finally, if we understand what are the perceptions, what are the expectations, we need to match those two things. Every country may have its own reputation profile. This is the average of the 60 countries with the large reputation. And we see that, for example, there is a gap in being ethical and transparent with low corruption. The average is weak. While, for example, in appealing natural environment, the average is strong. Every country needs to have this picture and understand where are the strengths and the weaknesses. But the most interesting thing is to get this picture through the lenses of the relevance of the expectations of the audiences. If we have this chart in which we have in the axis, in the x-axis, in the horizontal, the perceptions of the different attributes, in the vertical axis, the relevance, the importance of the different attributes, we see that, for example, this is the average of the GDP 60 countries, of the top countries by GDP. If we see the green attributes, the ones of ethics and responsibility, are very important. They are high in this chart, but they are on the left. They do not score well. Well, for example, friendly people, appealing natural environment are attributes that tend to score high. So we see that there is a pending issue for a majority of the large countries in terms of ethics and responsibility. Each country, in order to manage reputation, should have this picture, knowing what are the most important attributes and what are their perceptions on those attributes. And just to end this way of managing reputation, the last thing we need to do is to compare reality versus perception. I am coming back again to the von Bloom matrix. Opportunities, communication opportunities, or reputation risks. In order to explain that, I have taken a couple of examples. First example, quality of the education system. We have tried to find a reality variable. For doing that, what I have taken is the results on the OECD PISA reports that measure for students their level on science, mathematics, and reading. I've made an average of the 3 scores for the countries where we have the reputation metrics plus the results from the PISA reports, and compare it to the attribute on our study of quality of the education system. So you have the PISA score on the horizontal axis, and you have the perception score on quality of education system in the vertical axis. The first thing we can see is that there is a good correlation on this picture between reality and perception, because more or less countries that have a better score in the PISA reports also score high over here. But we can see that, for example, Singapore, which is the country that scores the highest in the PISA reports, is not the one with the best perception. Norway is the country with the best perception, but it is Norway is more or less in the average of the OECD countries. So Norway could have a reputation risk because it has a very good perception, but its reality is good, but not as good. So in every single variable of the 22 variables, we could do this kind of analysis. Try to see where is your country in terms of reality versus perception, and know if you can communicate because you are doing well and people don't know, the case of Singapore, or if you know to work harder because you have a good perception, but your reality may not be as good, no? As in the other case. I have taken a second example, which is even more interesting than this one, which is climate change. Nowadays, we have seen that in the expectations of the general opinion, the taking care of the environment and fighting climate change is one of the top priorities. If we see the comparison between actually a reality, and for reality, I've taken the per capita greenhouse gas emissions in CO2 equivalents, it's tons per person, and for the perception, the attribute that we have fight against climate change. Over here, positive and negative is the opposite from the previous chart, because the more emissions, the worse situations you are in, no? And over here you can see that there are countries with very good perception but very bad reality, and countries with very good perceptions and good reality, and all the others. I would like to say, just to mention that I had to take out 2 countries of this chart, because if not, all the dots would be very concentrated. I had to take out Qatar, that had 70 tons per capita. You see that Saudi Arabia and Australia, that are the ones that have the highest here, are in 22. And I took out as well United Arab Emirates, because they have 32. So if you have a look at this chart, Australia is a high reputation risk. It has a very good perception, but a very bad reality, or a reality of high emissions. Switzerland or Sweden have very good perception, but also very good reality. Saudi Arabia or Russia have a bad perception, but also not a good reality. But then there are countries, some of them because they are poorer, and they do that is the reason, because of they do not have a high emission. But there are others that have invested in renewable sources of energy, that have good communication opportunities, because this is a very relevant attribute in which they have a bad perception but a good reality. So, well, after this example, I just would like to finish my presentation with some takeaways. First of all, like companies, countries have a reputation that can be measured and should be managed. A country's reputation is a set of feelings generated through direct experience, communication, the opinions of third parties, and stereotypes accepted in the collective imaginary. A country's reputation has an impact on its economy, as it conditions the behavior of its stakeholders. Although reputation is an emotional concept, it is explained through a set of very relevant rational drivers related to all kinds of geographical, cultural, economic, political, and social aspects. And we can manage those rational drivers. And among these rational levers, those related to ESG criteria align with the expectations of international public opinion. I would say that they concentrate a lot currently the expectations. So it is important to do well and to be perceived well in being a sustainable country. And finally, perception and reality do not always match. Managing a country's reputation requires closing the gaps, understanding what is your perception, what is the reality, and when do you have communication opportunities or you have reputational risks. And well, up to here, my presentation. I'm going to close and pass to Claire to start debating. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fernando. There's a lot of information in that presentation, and I'm delighted now to come to Christian to ask some of your thoughts. First of all, I very much like that Fernando started off by saying this was not a beauty parade, and I think that's the problem with the word rankings. We see lots of many different rankings, and I suspect that there's a danger that they can be weaponized, particularly for those of you out there whose job is to manage your place brand. When your stakeholders come to you and say, why are we at this point on this ranking, perhaps without understanding it. So can I come to you, Christian, and ask first, how do you use rankings in the management of Sweden's reputation, and how do you manage stakeholder expectations around that?
Well, it's a very good question. I mean, we've followed different rankings for almost 20 years, I think. So I think that's one of the lessons that you have to sort of measure performance for a long time to really understand. You cannot just do it once and then understand the world's perception. So you have to do this for a long time to really understand how your image is and the perception of your country is. That's one of this. I mean, all brands have to do that, and it's very, very important for us to do that. And I think we more and more understand. I mean, we cannot use these rankings to measure our own performance as an organization, which is impossible. So that's not what we really use them for. I think we use them for some sort of market intelligence to understand where, as Fernando was saying, pretty much, where's the gap? Is there a gap that should be closed, or is there something? If there's a gap, I mean, if the perception is better than when reality, I mean, then you probably have an issue. It cannot be really managed by communication, really. So that's another thing that maybe you should be very, very aware of course. But I think people are very interested in these questions. That's my experience. All our stakeholders. I mean, this gives us very much also our reason to operate, really. So international opinion is very relevant, especially for countries like Sweden, it's a smaller nation, and so it becomes also, it's a national debate sometimes, especially in times of crisis, to really, maybe that's most important. If there's some sort of sense of a crisis, then you really need this data sometimes to understand, okay, something has happened with public opinion, or the public opinion didn't really notice as much as we maybe feared or thought, being within the country and listening to the internal debate. So also following this over time is what is really happening with public opinion. I think that's one thing. And of course, understanding what really drives people globally. What are the things that matter to people? If you want to match your marketing or communication or managing what stakeholders' strategy, really.
We talked about this a little bit in our briefing call, because you said that there's sometimes a disconnect between, and I think a lot of places would have this, between what people around the world think of Sweden versus what the people within Sweden think. And I related that I had been contacted by the media a couple of years ago when there was some outbreaks of violence in Sweden, and there was concern amongst the national media that would affect your international reputation. And I said, I actually don't think it has, because I don't think anyone's noticed. But yeah, you mentioned that particular example of how you track the opinions in different countries, and particularly different countries that are important for Sweden in terms of trading or visitor or investment. I wonder if you could share that example of how you set about trying to manage the risk there.
I mean, those rankings or these sort of insights, of course, if there's a public opinion or an issue within the country that's really matter. I mean, the question of crime and within Sweden has been the one that really sort of made the election go the way it did, actually, in Sweden. So it's a very big topic. But so people are really concerned within the business community, within talent attraction, and will this affect people actually buying our products, investing in our country, coming as a tourist, and so on. So it's very important, of course, when we see these trends, or what do you want to say, and to understand what sort of the spread of these international. And we can see that there many countries work, I guess. I mean, we can see some trends within the Nordics that Sweden and Norway and Denmark, we're quite close, and it's relevant for them to understand what happens in Sweden. But just going to Germany or to the UK, we can see that it sort of fades away quite rapidly, actually. So international news doesn't really travel that far. So that's also sometimes this gives you sometimes some calm, maybe, when it comes to, okay, maybe you can still attract and market. Maybe it hasn't penetrated, but as Fernando was always into, it's also, of course, there's a risk here, because maybe the perception is very good, but then the reality is maybe a bit better than. So if you actually come and experience something, the brand experience gap, of course, you want to have a brand experience gap that's as narrow as possible, of course. So that's, of course, important to address the issue, if you have an issue, by policy and try to solve the problem. So closing that gap. Otherwise, of course, you might experience problems because people will come and experience something that they didn't expect, and that news will travel. Maybe it takes 10 years, I don't know, but if it's a reality, the reality will catch you up, I guess.
We were talking, we always talk about the need for any communication strategy to be based on the authentic reality. So so there's it isn't sensible to think, national problems take too long to impact on international markets. Things do have to be dealt with. And when we chatted before, you mentioned the issue, I think it was with Qatar, and with the burning of the Quran in Sweden, and you came up with some very useful pointers. I wonder if you can share them now. And you talked about how you kind of manage that communication, how important it was to have people in different markets, etc.
Well, it's extremely important, of course. As probably some of you are aware of, there was some incidents, still are actually some incidents, where people have burned the Quran streets in Sweden, and there was some big major uproar in the Muslim community around the world around this issue. And what we could see, of course, that there was some we could see the media attention and social media. There were a lot of mentions and a lot of negativity that concerned Sweden. So how do you actually handle that as a sort of a brand strategy sort of a country? Because this was not disinformation. I mean, that's a different thing. Did we actually behave in a matter that actually could be perceived as bad or insulting in this case? So I think then the strategy maybe is different than when it's pure false news. So what we did, of course, what our lessons is to be in the conversation, to be there, to be sort of still own the narrative. You cannot just back away into a corner and let everyone talk about you. You have to be present. And everyone who have a stake in this, and when it comes to the contraband, I mean, it's pretty much everyone. It's the government, it's the companies, it's everyone who's in this place. It's a region in the Middle East, in North Africa, for instance. So everyone has to sort of be involved and be present and take time to communicate, to answer questions as good as you can, and I think the Swedish government was quite wise to also be very, very, not take a confrontative sort of stand here, to be a bit apologetic, trying to explain also how Sweden works. Be very formal and very, very fact-based communication, because I heard this from when we did some interviews especially in Saudi Arabia, that maybe we're a bit too quiet actually. You should have just said what you thought, what is happening, be out there and try to explain. It's better that sort of be in the narrative, and of course being present. If Swedish companies, for instance, are present in that region as they are, that helps with the resilience, of course, because they have relations, they have built this sort of the perception, a good perception within that nation, and the more presence and you have, the more relevant you are. I think that's also easier for you to when these things happen, to also handle them and come out of the crisis maybe a bit hurt, but still with a good reputation. And maybe things will fade away and some other news will take over, but still have that dialogue is very, very important.
Being there, yeah. I mean, I think that in everything you've said, I'm only going to say this because I've seen that, who signed up for this webinar, and obviously there are a lot of people responsible for nation brands, but there are also people working for city brands and region brands. And I think everything that we're talking about today is translatable, even if as a city or a region you're not appearing on the RepCore study. Right, we've started to have some questions come through. The first two are Fernando, but please do put your questions in the Q&A chat, and if you have any questions for Christian as well, I know he'll be happy to take them, and I will come back to Christian shortly as well. These are a couple of technical questions, I think. So first of all, Fernando, And this is really to the heart of it, because you had a slide that talked about the 4.9% increase in tourism revenue if there's a 1 point increase in reputation, and and that's the core of the issue, isn't it? If reputation impacts on economic performance, that's why we have to manage it. So the question is this a basic regression analysis? If so, would you not say that the correlation is only due to the fact that richer countries tend to have a better reputation for historical reasons, etc.?
Actually, what we have done, our statistical team has taken 3 years of data from the World Trade Organization in tourist arrivals in dollar value. And yes, we have a regression analysis with very good fit, by the way, on the support, on the intent. But then we also got to the the model also makes the averages of the different increases of all the countries. So basically, this is on average what we can expect if a country increases reputation in 1 point. There are richer countries and poorer countries in the study. We have included, for doing this analysis, all 60 with the largest GDP. So this would apply to all countries. I perhaps, in order to answer specifically the question, we could make a set of countries with largest GDP per capita versus lowest GDP per capita and see if it works the same. You can also, this is just a rough number. In the past, we have done analysis for specific countries, countries that are very with an economy very much driven by tourism, normally have larger impact than others. But this is, let's say, taking all the countries, this is an average number in order to give you an idea. I would like to ask you to have a look on those correlations that we have shown for the different elements, like, for example, the intention to visit. When people say that they admire a country, they also say, I would visit that country. It happens, and we can, you can do it with in a single source with the correlation that doesn't have that hasn't have to imply that the one is causing the other, causality, but we have done it also with the hard data, and we arrived to similar conclusions.
Are you able to provide a country-specific report that shows reputation versus reality across all factors?
Well, we are measuring.
The answer is yes.
Perceptions. Exactly. We are measuring perceptions, and we need to find we cannot find all the reality variables always. We do the reports on perception and try to find those elements in order to drive our recommendations. Sometimes, and I would like to come to Christian's answers before about internal issues and internal reputation. Several times we use the internal perception, the internal reputation, as a proxy of reality, which is not reality, it's internal perception. But for example, there are attributes in which you see that the country nationals tend to have a worse or better perception than the international perception. That tells you, well, we have some positive things here that we could communicate outside, or we have some risks here because people think in a worse way about their country than the international perception. So we do all that. We not always have the reality data. We always have the perception data.
Okay, thank you very much. If you have any more questions, you put them in. We have about 3 minutes left of the webinar. So I just wanted to come back to you, Christian, if I may, because I mean, even on this study, I think what you can see is that the movements are usually very slight. And that is true on any ranking. I mean, you're in a fortunate position in Sweden, and we always see the Nordics countries coming out so well on most of this study and other similar studies. But when something moves so slowly, I guess I think what I'm trying to come to is, how important are these rankings when things move so slowly? And how do you, as a country brand manager, look at, decide kind of what to invest and how often to track this kind of information?
Well, I think that's still is one of the most interesting results. And I think you still need to communicate to the stakeholders over and over and over and over again, because they think if they don't understand, we are professionals in this room here. I mean, we understand this topic, but people don't understand. They think that something is written in the New York Times negatively, that will destroy your nation brand. So I think one of our main tasks, one of the things I do all the time is just repeating this. Now we have the data that the images of your country very changes very slowly, and that is a very important insight still. Of course, it's positive for us to have a positive brand as being Sweden. Maybe it's more negative for a country that has maybe a better reality than perception, of course, and it takes time. Of course, we have an advantage, the Nordic countries and Switzerland and New Zealand, of course, for attracting the things that we want to attract. But still, I think we need to go out and communicate to our stakeholders how these things actually work, because no one else really follows the data as closely as we do.
Yes. I know, do you know, the very first podcast we recorded on our Place-to-Place podcast series was with New Zealand and Costa Rica. And I do remember that both of those country brand managers came out and said, oh my goodness, the number of politicians that come in waving the latest report at me. And you have to know what every ranking is about and, what they're measuring and how that relates to what your objectives are. I mean, can I come back to you, Fernando, on what Christian's just said? Because you've talked about reputation risk, and then at the other end of the scale, communication opportunity. And, I wonder if there's I don't know how to express this properly, but, what Christian's saying, they're quite fortunate in Sweden and in the Nordics because they have a good reputation, they have a good reality, so there is not so much risk. And even where it is, because perceptions take longer to catch up, that you need to respond to the risk, but you've probably got longer to respond. Where there is a communication opportunity, do you see that there's more of an opportunity to make an impact? If your reality is better than perception, a good communication strategy, do you think that will cause a quicker change in perception?
Definitely, Claire. My experience tells me that there is a lack of information in public, let's say, public opinion in general. Even in the more informed opinion about countries. And a lot of the reputation of countries is made of stereotypes, is made of fast information, some news, but there is a lot of information that is missing there. And just by saying more, communicating what you do well, the strong things of your reality, it's always a good tool to increase reputation. And we find lots of communication opportunities when we do this kind of analysis for countries. Again, there are countries with strong stereotypes that are not fair for their reality. There are countries that have made humongous progress, but are still in the mind of people that are living in a different continent. They still think about ideas that come from the past. From my point of view, a lot of communication opportunities, and that is a quick way. There are a lot of quick wins. When there is something that is very relevant in an attribute with a lot of importance, that you see that your reality is good and no one knows, that is a quick win.
Thank you. I think we'll leave on that positive note that there's a real opportunity out there. And I'm going to close. I'm going to thank everybody for joining us today. I'm going to close the session. I'm going to warn Fernando and Christian that when I do that, that also means I lose you. So thank you both very much for joining us today. And we'll follow up by email. But thank you all for joining us. The session has been recorded as well. If you would like to come back and watch bits of it or reference, send your colleagues towards it. And if you have any specific questions, then message City Nation Place and we'll put you in touch with Fernando. Thank you all very much and have a good evening or a good rest of your day. Thank you. Bye-bye.